go ahead and get started if you like.
All right. Well, the email that I sent out starts with a quote from the introduction of the Norton edition, and yeah, and I think it's a good place to start discussing the end of the novel, the exchange between Brett and Jake.
Jake's response to Brett in the novel's last line should therefore be read not only as his rejoinder to her clearly false sense that they could have had such a damn good time together, unless we're being hard on that damned, but also as applied to all of the stories people tell themselves about their values and their choices and the meaningfulness of life in the modern world. Isn't it pretty to think so?
So I want to, when in the quote when they say lean hard, I want to lean hard on values and choices. Like in the novel, do any of the characters have real values or make good choices?
No, when you say real values, I mean, there are good values and bad values.
Yeah, or just like the aptitude of having values.
Yeah, okay. An absence of normal, yes. Does anybody have values? I think that's basically the question.
Yeah, does anyone have values?
I think they all have values of varying sorts, not particularly enviable or desirable.
Right.
The avoidance of work, the avoidance of paying for anything.
But that, it's interesting that word values because, I read in one of the articles in the Dawn edition that specific sums are brought up 30 some times by Jake in the novel. And that's not to say when he says, I tipped this person, I tipped that person, I paid for this, those don't count. Only when he mentions a specific sum of money. And he does that over 30 times. So his values, there's some double wordplay there, I think. Because he's so concerned with like the value of things.
Yeah.
And that quote when he says, my friendship with Brenda was getting something for nothing. He's very concerned with like kind of the comeuppance of the value of things. Why is that?
It does seem to me that one of the few values that they have is that the guy in charge pays for the drinks in some fashion. There's a little bit of argument about who's getting this round and whether or not they can buy drinks from Spaniards, and whether they insist on not taking their money. The question of who's paying has something to do with who's the top dog, who's the host, who's in charge of the situation.
Isn't that more of a power question than a values question?
But they don't try to dodge that, except for Mike, who politely goes on about how he hasn't paid off his creditors,
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. So in contrast to him, everybody else, they kind of try to pay their own bills, but they'll dodge being in the position to pay it. But if they're stuck in that position, they pay it.
But they roll dice all the time. See, okay.
It's true.
They only do that in part 3, I thought.
Yeah, and that's when Mike is taking his last $20 and paying for everything. And he can't pay for the last roll. So I think that the values, to me, is more of a moral question. I think that The fact that he talks about money 30 times is not all that important, but right in the book, Hemingway writes, I only know what is moral is what makes you feel good after, and what is immoral is what makes you feel bad after. That's pretty much saying it right there, isn't it?
Where is that quote? Is that in part 3 or? I
It's on
would
page
argue,
55 on my.
okay. I would argue that the value, money value and moral value are intertwined a little more than that.
Isn't it, I apologize, because I can't get away from this, the historic background of this novel, World War I in particular. Wasn't there a question of, well, what values are there that really matter anymore?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I think that's the values question in the piece.
Maybe you can answer this. Do you know anything about what the exchange rate was then?
No idea. I just know it was a terrible time in America.
Yeah, it was a terrible time in America. It was ridiculously cheap to live in Europe.
Yeah.
And so maybe he's very adamant about stating like the value of things, the monetary value.
Maybe saying that's the only value.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there is something about money. Yes, Anne, you were gonna say.
Well, go ahead, finish your thought, because I haven't.
There's something to do with money, even with Brett, who in that scene in part 1 when Georgette comes in, the prostitute that Jake hires. Brett pretty much says, you know, I don't like prostitutes, at least I don't charge guys. You know, and that's kind of the ongoing joke. Is that like, I'm not gonna take people's money when she breaks up with Romero. Romero offers to pay for that. And the Greek count offered her $10,000 just for her company.
Wait, was that her only saving grace, you think, the fact that she didn't take money? Other than that, she's like a pretty horrible person.
Well, there's a section in there talking about Brett, back on page 139. And we talked about it last week with the women make such swell friends, awfully swell. But then the next paragraph, Jake is saying, I thought I had paid for everything. Not like the woman pays and pays and pays. Suzanne and I were talking about this last week. No idea of retribution or punishment, just exchange of values. I have no clue what that means. I don't know what he's trying to say.
Anyone?
Wait, can you read it one more time?
Sure, and this is after he said women make such swell friends. The next paragraph. I thought I had paid for everything. Not like the woman pays and pays and pays. No idea of retribution or punishment, just exchange of values. You gave up something and got something else, or you worked for something. You paid some way for everything that was any good.
There's that word values again. There's something in there, I'm not really sure if I have a handle on it, between like values, like people's moral values and the value of things.
It's like I thought he was saying that, well, Stim was the one who brought it up, that, that Brett has paid in her reputation. She has, for being easy, so to speak. But I don't know what he means here, not like the woman pays and pays and pays.
Wasn't that a woman's role in most of history? Pay. You're always dependent on someone, so you're always paying for everything. I think he's just showing that difference between men and women there.
Maybe.
Yeah, I think so too.
Wait, he's paying for the rest of his life for something. That's the impotence, the war wound.
Yeah.
Okay, whatever it's, okay.
Dysfunction.
Dysfunction.
He's very pragmatic. I think I know William James in there. He only values things that you can grasp. Hunting, fishing, maybe a very specific relationship between man and woman. And he doesn't, I don't think he deals with abstract values. I think he deals with very pragmatic values. I think very much, he still carries that 19th century American romanticism with him that got kicked in the teeth in World War I.
Okay. Yeah, there is something like very American in his, trying to think of a good better word this, in his connection between like, you know, I pay for everything. I'm gonna do the right thing.
A little further on in that paragraph that you just read, he says, either you paid by learning about them or by experience, taking chances, or by money. Enjoying living was learning to get your money's worth and knowing when you had it. You could get your money's worth. The world was a good place to buy in.
That's American.
Yeah,
Yeah, everything has its price, yeah.
Yeah.
Everything has to be paid for. Yeah, that was a good thing to point out.
On page 169
In here.
of this edition, yeah. There's another really, really good quote in this paragraph.
Okay. Let's see. The waiter seemed a little offended about the flowers of the Pyrenees, so I overtipped him. That made him happy. It felt comfortable to be in a country where it is so simple to make people happy. You can never tell whether a Spanish waiter will thank you. Everything is on such a clear financial basis in France. It is the simplest country to live in. No one makes things complicated by becoming your friend for any obscure reason. If you want people to like you, you only have to spend a little money. I spent a little money and the waiter liked me. He appreciated my valuable qualities. He would be glad to see me back. I would dine there again sometime and he would be glad to see me. And he would want me at his table. It would be a sincere liking because it would have a sound basis. I was back in France.
Oh, that's sad.
Yeah,
You buy relationships?
pardon?
You buy relationships? Are they trying to buy a relationship? Are they so desperate?
In France, I'm not sure if desperate's the right word, but in France, that sincerity can be bought. You're right. And everything that was free in Pamplona is somehow more sincere than when, or am I saying this right?
Yeah, in France, it's transactional.
Yeah,
In Spain, I have a lot of Hispanic workers in my company,
okay.
and you never approach them and said, do this for money. You said, do you help me?
Really?
And they would give you everything. Can you help me? And that's the difference. And I think I lived in Paris for a couple of years. It is very transactional.
Okay.
People aren't your friends, ever.
Well, is that necessarily a bad thing?
I didn't say it was bad, I just said what it was.
Yeah.
And I don't think Jake is saying it's bad.
Yeah.
But he's making the distinction that, similar to that, you know, it's transactional, so you know, in transaction, you know what you're paying and what you're getting.
Yeah, put your money where your mouth is.
Well, there's a certainty to it.
Yeah.
It's a lot simpler than other transactions like
No, it's not necessarily simpler. If it's transactional, it's just that.
straightforward. Yeah, that's what it is.
But if you have to care about someone to get something back, you have to give something of yourself, as opposed to just change.
So then when we were talking yesterday, you brought up an analogy, digital versus analog.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, I'm not sure I can articulate it, but
It just struck me that life in Spain was like the analog version and life in France was the digital version. Because in Spain, everything flowed together. The experiences lasted the whole day and it was multi-sensory. But in France, everything was chopped into bits where his way of writing is more clipped. You know, this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. And there's no sense of things tying together in any kind of organic way. But when he was in Spain, everything flowed together into a complete experience. And it just struck me that it's something like the argument that's between, do you want analog or digital? You know, I hear it all the time in music, aficionados, but it's the same kind of thing. Do you want something that gives that organic experience, or do you want something that is broken into bits that are easily interchangeable? And so.
I think that is kind of implied with the fragmented nature of parts 1 and 3, whereas part 2 and the novel is a lot more flowing.
But why, okay, let me take what you just said a step further.
Okay.
Why then would they not have lived in Spain instead of Paris?
I think because of what you said, they do have to give of themselves to be there. And you notice all of their frictions in the group all came to the surface while they were there.
Mm-hmm.
You can't remain a person that only shows the surface when you're in that sort of a situation. You have to give of yourself from your real self. But in France, in the way that they were living with it, they could stay on the surface. It was all about how things looked and how things appeared and, you know, everything transactional. Just, you didn't have to go deep. So.
I think that's a good point to think about everything being surface level and transactional. Not in Pamplona, like everything else. But in Pamplona it was kind of this like pre-capitalist ideal that was like they were over it by the end of part 2, and it was like back to reality, back to France. And this idea of surface level, like things being having a sheen to them. And at the end of the novel, when Jake Ballard responds to Brett, we could have had such a damn good time together. He says, isn't it pretty to think so? Pretty is not Jake's word. He never uses that word the rest of the novel. Brett does several times. She describes Romero as pretty. And she says several other times in the novel. Why does Jake say it's pretty? Is it meant to be sarcastic, you think? Like
No,
pretty?
it's patronizing.
Pardon?
It's patronizing. I think it's patronizing to Brett.
Okay.
I think that the end is interesting because, the narrator is obviously Hemingway, and despite this conceit that he uses so that he can be the unbiased narrator, which is that he has to take sex out of the equation, he has to get the girl in the end. So despite that, I think he had to get the girl in the end in order to satisfy his own ego.
Okay, there is something to that. I think in that he's kind of rejecting Brett with that statement. Like, you know, we could have had him goodbye. Yeah, okay, it's pretty, I think so. Interestingly, that last line in some editions, he agrees with her first. He says, yes, isn't it pretty to think so? But in other editions, he doesn't agree with her. He just responds, isn't it pretty to think so? What makes the difference?
Mine's 1954, says yes.
Okay, my edition, he doesn't agree with her.
Did your research tell you anything about why the change, who made the change?
No, I'm sure that's a very answerable question, but I didn't look into it, no.
He puts it in the conditional. We could have had such a good time, so wishing for what could have been.
Yeah.
Pretty futile. And so pretty, I like your play on pretty, but something to look at, but.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very surface level.
Do that. But I think it's just, I think it reflects his bitter state. Even though he knows he can't do anything about it, I'm gonna catch myself out here, because I don't think he's altogether bitter. I mean, I think there's some redeeming faculties in Jake, but he knows he can't do anything about his condition.
Right.
So, and she knows it. He knows that she knows it, and she knows that he knows that she knows it. There's no secrets in that. So, on they go.
On they go.
Being backwards against the tide.
That's interesting. There's a whole chapter in the book that I loaned you about interplay between Gatsby and the Sorrows of Ride. There are especially a lot of play with Nick Carraway's inability to actually talk about the war, and Jake's like, we don't talk about it. Brett brings that up at the end, like, I don't want to talk about Romero at all. And she does. And Bill says to Jake, we're not going to talk about your war wound. It's not the sort of thing that we talk about because, like Henry's bicycle says, it's an allusion to a Henry James short story. I'm not sure which one. But there is something there.
Really do go out of their way not to talk about
Yeah. But there is like this disparity between things that are on the surface level, things that are pretty, and the truth of things. And the truth of things tended to come out in book 2, whether or not like the characters wanted to. Like, we see Brett's true colors. We see Mike's true colors. We see Bill's true colors. And we see Robert's true colors. But then everything kind of clicks back to the surface level in books 1 and 3. Will, can you read that quote? That's the one about the war wound.
Whoever said that Jake was emasculated precisely as a steer, actually he had been wounded in quite a different way, and that his testicles were intact and not damaged. Thus he was capable of all normal feeling as a man, but incapable of consummating it. The important distinction is that his wound was physical and not psychological, and that he was not emasculating. So I still have no idea what that means.
Why? I think that that was from an interview in '54 with the Paris Review. So why not talk about it until that point? Like every time that Jake got the opportunity to make that distinction in the book, he didn't talk about it.
But it's a related question. I should know this, but I really don't. How many of the other males in this story, this group of characters, fought in the war besides Jake?
Good point. I don't think.
I don't recall any of them.
Michael.
None.
Yeah,
Who else
Mike.
Like,
was?
And Brett's first husband.
right,
Yeah.
So he's
So,
not a character, he's just mentioned.
right, but he was mentioned, Jerry, you were saying last week. I think there were 40,000 words cut after Fitzgerald got a hold of it. And a lot of that was Brett's backstory in the beginning. So it's kind of implied now that she was damaged by the war as well.
That Brett was.
Yeah.
Was mentally damaged, emotionally, physically damaged?
Emotionally.
Yeah, she was a nurse.
Yeah, that's Jack, right.
And abused by her husband.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'd like to read those 40,000 words that he cut. That would really change the story.
I think they're in this edition.
Really,
Yeah.
The end of this cut,
Fitzgerald.
Fitzgerald.
Gerald cut.
And Ezra Pound cut a bit too.
Yeah.
Oh, I'd like to pass that around to the Norton edition that I did a lot of my research on.
This is the same one you have, Jerry? It's different cover. It's the Norton.
Quite plain.
That's Norton?
Yes,
Oh,
it's
that's
good.
good. Oh, it's good.
But that idea of things being a surface level, at least in books 1 and 2, why is that important to keep it not real, but why is the truth revealed a little more in book 2 than books 1 and 3? Do you think?
Could you clarify the truth about what?
Well,
About the way
like
things are?
they avoid talking about, like we don't talk about that. Is that a lot in books 1 and 3? But in book 2, a lot of the characters show their true colors in this arena of Spain and the bullfights and the fiesta, where things get a little freer. What about that atmosphere is avoided?
Well, they're kind of in their own bullfight. You know, they're kept together. It's life or death. You know, they're held in a small space where they can't get away from one another. And they're drinking 24/7. So something's going to come out.
It's also interesting that they're going for the bullfight, but it's also fiesta time. Right?
Yeah.
And in any strongly aristocratic Catholic country. 360 days of the year, it's a very repressed society. And then the church says, we got to steam off and anything goes for that week, right? And they're there, anything goes. And pretty much anything goes in this group.
Yeah.
And Paris is the two bookends where it's not as repressed, but it's more middle class, normal. How you're living your life, isn't it? So I think the fact that they're in this festival is very telling.
When in book 3, when he goes to San Sebastian, in essence, to cleanse himself, he spends a lot. But he also talks about the Tour de France. Does that juxtaposition of the bullfights and the Tour de France, does that say anything about one, like France versus Spain?
I don't remember that section. That's where he's going, that the Frenchman's always going about every being sportif.
Yes.
I just look at it as being a typical Frenchman.
Well, that quote where he's saying relationships and friends are much more based on transaction. And he talks about the potential for betting on the Tour de France. What did he say in book 2? You could bet on bullfights, but why would you? It's like betting on the war. You know, no money, you already have skin in the game. Why? Add that element of money to it. So maybe what he's saying is France.
Again.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not something you do because you have a passion for it. You do it because you got money in the game.
Well, and the other thing is, you know, a bullfight is very visceral, but the Tour de France, in comparison, you could call superficial on the surface of the road, and it's not, you know, I mean, maybe other than falling off your bike, you know, there's not a personal risk or injury. So I think that's also reinforcing the idea that, you know, they're kind of playing it safe and on the surface in the two sections in France, but, you know, they're getting a bit deeper when they're in Spain.
Okay.
They're watching, in that central book where they're watching, they're not involved in the bullfight, right? And that's a mano kind of situation. Perhaps kind of like combat, infantrymen combat in the First War, a lot of hand-to-hand fighting. But they're all removed from it. So in this book, perhaps Hemingway shows the extent to which this cadre, this coterie of people who are just knocking about, hitting this and that, have a chance to come up against something that's real. They can't make the jump. I mean, I think there's a certain purity in that bullfight ethic. That's not an offense to bullfighting or anything. They're just the crucial nature of it, the pageantry of the matador going against a force that could easily kill him. A lot of them do get killed or wounded badly. And yet that's the characters in the story don't ever come up against this except for Jake's being wounded in the war. And that's sort of in the past. So I was wondering, my thoughts are not very clear, are they? There's the notion that the characters are bumping up against something that is real, that really is, as someone said, visceral, something that really is, takes true courage, physical courage. And the characters, of course, never have that opportunity. And they don't take the opportunity to exert the kind of courage it would take to face their own infirmities or limitations, and really deal with them.
Okay.
So then, maybe to your point, in the third book, go back to what we've been doing.
Frank, you made the point also kind of along those lines. And Willie mentioned their gambling in the beginning of book 3. Why is that there? That seemed very, very contra to how Jake functioned with money with a brief limit. It seemed to me and out of place in the early book 3, given his kind of stringent with money for a long time in books 1 and later book 2. Or later book 3, I mean. In what way is gambling? I don't know, it seemed very against how Jake functioned in the rest of the novel. All of a sudden he was gambling.
Isn't that kind of the whole Huck Finn theory here, where the beginning and end of the novels are more comic?
Okay, yeah.
The Spanish section in the middle is where all the serious things go on. So when they're in Spain, Jake is asserting his masculinity and paying for everything, and then we go to Paris is a whole different situation, and then against men amongst men who gamble for the right to pay the bill. I don't know. I just think this book is bookend very deliberately. So I think Hemingway probably thought about it. So I'm going to change the way things are happening in these two places when I change locations.
Unlike the end of Huck Finn, though, it doesn't really end ever. It just kind of peters out. This book has a very different end. They separated things, so it ends with a very strong Hemingway period.
I don't think Jake gave up. I think he just recognized it was futile, but I don't think he gave up. I think if this book went on, they would just come together and come apart.
You think Jake hasn't learned a lesson? See, I think at the end he is saying, I'm done with you, Brad. I'm no longer in love with you. You may be my responsibility because I introduced you to Romero. But I don't know, he does admit in book 2 during his sitting room with Billy
He was in the middle of a meal where he wanted to be, and he gets a telegram and he takes off.
Yeah,
There's some.
as soon as she cries help.
Is that out of love or out of responsibility, though?
Yeah, but I don't see, the last line as a kiss-off between Jake and Brett as much as, he's at least admitting to himself, and whether or not she gets it, that, nothing's going to happen. So it's still, whatever you want to think would be conjecture. It might be a beautiful dream, but it's a dream, not reality.
Yeah, I don't think he should be responsible for Brett. She went with Mike where she wanted to go. She went with Romero where she wanted to go, even though she used her money to pay off Montoya in the hotel. She's not his problem. He could have said, sorry you got yourself in this mess.
Or he could have just sent her a check.
Yes, send them money somehow, but I think he's
I
He
think,
put his arm around her there at the end. He's
Yeah.
sitting in the taxi, puts his arm around her, she cuddles up close to him. And I don't think he's done with her.
because she's not a very nice person until the end, where she says, I'll destroy this young man if I don't leave. And that's the first moral statement and action she's taken in the whole book. And how would Jake not respond to that? Because he's already infatuated. So I don't, he recognizes for the moment that this ain't gonna work, but, you know, libido is always beating.
True. Apparently he still does have the libido
Or something.
or something. Yeah.
Whoever said there was a definite ending, I agree. But it's not the kind of ending where we know what lies in store. I mean, it's open-ended, and I think a lot of open-endedness is goes into the making of a successful piece of fiction. You don't have everything just tidied up at the end, like we do in the cowboy movies.
Right, they're not riding off into the sunset.
Sunset, yeah.
So they're not tidy people.
But it's not a, how do I say it? I don't, I mean, if everything were very vague or just poor writing, it would be vague. That's another thing. That kind of work would be open-ended too, but it wouldn't be very good work. This one, I think, I really like this novel for its bluntness. And there's enough that's elusive in there to keep me interested. The characters, I can't really nail everyone down. I mean, there's some things we can be sure of, that they're feckless. I can go back from bumping about from one thing to another without much purpose.
Ambiguous endings was sort of the style of the time.
Yeah, good point.
Well, Gatsby's the same way.
And then you bring up an interesting point about what brought us in his novel still. Because it is like you had said, like, why these people don't seem like they're having any fun? It's not a fun read. Why are we still drawn to it? Like, what about the novel is redemptive?
I think the characters are very believable.
Okay.
You've done a good job developing character. You can, we, the readers, can, that's one of the major ingredients. There is no plot. I mean,
Yeah.
since it's just day to day
Yeah.
living, and there's no battle they're gonna fight or a bridge they're gonna blow up, or there's no romance that's consummated when it comes to, in the story, that comes to fruition there for marriage or commitment. I don't know, is there?
Kind of like the world gets
Disagree
World
or
War
what
One.
about plot? There doesn't seem to be a plot. It's kind of like Huckleberry Finn, where Twain threatened to shoot you if you found a plot introduction. Anybody trying to find a plot will be prosecuted or something like that. Find a moral will be shot.
I found myself wondering if we had this book, we had this manuscript, and it didn't have Ernest Hemingway's name on it.
Okay.
And you picked it up in your local library, just out of curiosity, and you didn't know who wrote it, if people would still be drawn to it.
Well, that's an interesting observation because this was kind of the first work that Hemingway really blew up his career.
I don't know, I think the first two chapters here, when he describes Robert Cohen and then Brett, just sucks you right into this book. I think he draws Cohen so well that you want to find out what happens here. And it makes what happens later so much more painful, you know?
Maybe
So do you think that this is a moralistic story? The wages of drinking and sex and violent sports, and that it's a nihilistic, the whole world is going to hell in a handbasket, and we might as well just, indulge in every sin we can think of.
Well, that's what he says, Glenn.
Yeah.
What makes you feel good is moral. What makes you feel bad is immoral.
Right.
I said it was one of the first existential novels. It's something I read the other day. It's like,
Well, what's one of the things that sticks with me and why I stick with it is, even though these folks are so cynical and disillusioned and nihilistic, but they keep going on. So, in the face of meaninglessness or lack of a moral compass, what do? Well, you got to still keep putting one foot in front of the other, and whether it's in hedonism of whatever sort, they keep going on. That's kind of why I like, Jake is the bitter, but I'm going to keep going on kind of character, because, what else can you do?
I get the feeling from this book, it's like a chemical interaction. The different characters aren't together because of any particular overreaching plan. It's like they're little chemicals that are interacting with one another, and different kind of solutions come out of it. The molecules are just moving around in a kind of random way, and sometimes they stick together and sometimes they're repelled from one another.
Well, these are, to me, unmoored people, ungrounded people
Yeah.
who, for whatever reason, mostly perverse, found themselves together. They were truly lost. They quoted about the lost generation, just dwelling so much.
I think he does a wonderful job of describing particular kinds of groups of people where they're not together because they have a purpose, they're not together because, they have some set link, they just kind of happen together, and the friction or the attraction or whatever is just strong enough to keep them together, but it doesn't give them any reason for doing what they're doing. So I think he describes it great in that respect.
Speaking of chemicals, I was thinking the word for book 2 is like the toxicity of the relationships kind of comes to a head in book 2. And afterwards Jake feels the need to cleanse himself, like I was saying, by swimming into basket. Kind of when he's done with everything, like kind of settling everything, by in the beginning of book 3, he gets a call from Brett. And we were kind of at odds thinking about, does he go and see Brett out of love or out of responsibility?
It always struck me as a responsibility for,
Yes.
And even when he's talking about Brett to someone earlier in the book, and he's giving her the little backstory we get, that she was married, had an abusive relationship and all that. It's for, I don't remember that. I clearly got why, but for some reason he took her under his wing.
Yeah.
And so as the nominal leader of the group, he feels responsible. And that's why when, she keeps coming back to him because he helps her take care of things or get her out of jams.
So I don't think love, I don't see a lot of love in this. I see a lot of reference and wordplay or lip service to love, but
Yeah, so
I don't see it.
Yeah, it's more responsibility than anything else.
I think they're codependent.
No, that's
I think they lean on each other. He gets something from her and she gets something from him, and it's not pretty.
Yeah, that's what in that section somebody read about I thought I paid for everything.
Right.
You give something and you get something back.
Return, yeah.
I think there's a lot of love in that, though. I see your point. I don't disagree with it so much, but I think because of the instances of their kissing, I think there's an intimacy there, although these are not love-making kisses. I mean, they're not in bed together, but they kiss frequently whenever they see each other. And it seemed to me it was sincere, not just like kissing your great aunt hello. And and so in the end, I think that, a lot of people Jake needs it. Robert Cohn needs it. Bill needs it. Mike needs it. A lot of people, does not respond to any of them in the way that he responds to Brett. I just thought there's something there. I think there's genuine caring.
There's caring and affection, but I don't know if it rises to the
You have
level.
to remember, this is early 20s. Brett's English. Hemingway's from the Midwest. If you talk about, like, to your grandparents, they could go through a 30-year marriage and never say, I love you. So that's not, the fact that they don't express that in those terms, I don't think is telling. I think it's of the time and of the people. And I think when Brett was 67 and he was 55 or whatever, and she sent him a telegram, he would have been there. I think there was a deep affection between them.
Okay, but I really like, and your point that they were codependent on each other. So do you think it's out of love or responsibility or codependency they would have?
I think it could be all three.
Yeah.
Ooh. Okay.
Well, we can't, but part of the artistry is we can't really nail it down.
Right.
Find
Yeah.
out, and yet it's not vague, if that's the right word.
Right.
It's not, the writing is good, the writing is convincing to me. So we can't be sure, it was all this way or all that way. It was either responsibility or love. Couldn't be a combination.
Well,
I think it's binary choice.
I think they were as close, they were the only people that I would refer to in the novel as war buddies, in the sense that he got injured and she was the nurse. And I think a bond of that type probably was created.
The introduction of the Norton edition makes an interesting point about the redemption of the novel, and the hero is not really Jake or anyone.
We are invited to find meaning in the arduous achievement of technique. No character in the novel is a moral model. Instead, the model is Hemingway, whose sentences powerfully convey the truth of the world's lack of moral guides.
So the hero of the novel is the style it is written in. It's pretty much what it's saying. To get to your point, Bill, can we talk about the writing in some way? The writing is the hero. The writing is a redemptive factor.
That's what Albert Kazan said, 1942.
Really?
Yeah, he said that.
Wow, I totally must have
The
skipped that.
characters weren't important, it was the story.
Okay.
Because the characters are kind of stick figures, aren't they? That Cohen is really well developed, but Bill and Mike, they're just kind of,
I didn't think Brett was
Strong.
well developed.
Who?
I didn't think Brett was well developed.
I think she was just a straw figure, easy to attack.
But the lack of depth, I agree with you. The lack of depth maybe reflects the lack of depth in the whole society.
Yeah.
Hemingway's comment. Let me read something Carlos Baker wrote this. Some also rises was the means Hemingway, the writer, chose to declare himself out of the alleged lostness of a generation whose vagaries he chronicled. He recorded his humorous scorn for the artistic scum of Montparnasse. He was very contemptuous. Jake, one view of Jake is that he is an imperturbable and damaged Hamlet. He rids himself of the deep-seated disgust for the oppressions of his environment and the people who make it oppressive. Like, that's getting more into what was in the writer's mind, and I think it's better to stick with the text, do textual explication than to try to read into it stuff of his life. But it's worthwhile to, it's an idea that I clung to, that the narrative consciousness, I mean, we've got first person narrator, but the overarching narrative consciousness is one that rejects the lostness of the generation.
So the argument there is that Jake rejects the lostness of the generation.
That's what Baker is writing. I mean, I think he's pretty good credit. He wrote that very definitive biography back in the late 60s, early 70s.
Okay.
Biography of Hemingway?
Yeah. Hemingway chose to declare himself out of the alleged lostness of a generation. It was vagaries he recorded.
That the Hemingway style was very unique in that it kind of brought the modernist style out of the cult of difficulty that is like The Wasteland and Joyce and Falling Away and everything that is very difficult. Hemingway's style went against that. So maybe that's what Baker is talking about. Did you read at all about the I only skimmed the article comparing it to Hamlet.
I didn't read that one, but you commenting on the connection with Hamlet, it's interesting to think that, here he is in the position of, he could be king of the world, but he's been blocked from being that, just like Hamlet being blocked from being king. And what do you do when you're blocked like that?
There is a lot of that in The Wasteland too. The Fisher King, not being able to procreate and make his kingdom whole again. That's one of the major themes of The Wasteland. And
A lot of fishing.
yeah, a lot of fishing, yes. Could we read the scene from this will get us back to like the theme of drinking and truth and very surface level, very surface level observations and necessity of staying surface level when things can potentially become very difficult to talk about. So you focus on surface level things.
When Lil's husband got demobbed, I didn't mince my words. I said to her myself, hurry up, please, it's time. Now Albert's coming back, make yourself a bit smart. He'll want to know what you done with that money he gave you to get yourself some teeth. He did, I was there. You have them all out, Lil, and get a nice set, he said. I swear I can't bear to look at you. And no more can't I said, and think of poor Albert. He's been in the Army 4 years. He wants a good time, and if you don't give it to him, there's others that will, I said. Oh, is there, she said. Something of that, I said. Then I'll know who to thank, she said, and give me a straight look. Hurry up, please, it's time. If you don't like it, you can get on with it, I said. Others can pick and choose if you can't. But if Albert takes off, it won't be for lack of telling. You ought to be ashamed, I said, to look so antique, and her only 31. I can't help it, she said, pulling a long face. It's them pills I took to bring it off, she said. She had 5 already and nearly died of young George. The chemist said it would be all right, but I've never been the same. You are a proper fool, I said. Well, if Albert won't leave you alone, there it is, I said. What you get married for if you don't want children? Hurry up, please, it's time. Well, that Sunday Albert was home. They had a hot gammon, and they asked me to dinner to get the beauty of it hot. Hurry up, please, it's time. Hurry up, please, it's time. Good night, Bill. Good night, Lou. Good night, May. Good night. Tata, good night, good night. Good night, ladies. Good night, sweet ladies. Good night, good night.
So what's going on in this scene?
You know, not to fully respond to that, but I think there's 4 references to hurry up, please, it's time. Am I right that there's no apostrophe in it's?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does that mean? It's time, without, as opposed to it is time.
Well, they're in a bar. Hurry up, please, it's time.
Yeah,
It's like, let's call, you know, so.
Okay, that makes sense.
So I think it's kind of, I haven't thought about that though. I think it's very colloquial though, because they're in a pub maybe. I don't know.
I think it's just a mistake.
You think of them, I don't think Elliot made the thing.
Really?
Yeah, but it's deliberate.
So if it's as the possessive, if he meant it's as the possessive and not as the contraction, then the question is, what is the it that it's the time of? And I'm not getting that right off the bat.
Glenn, what were you saying a minute ago?
I just said I thought it was a mistake, but maybe it's just an inside joke for Elliot. Hurry up, whose time? It's time.
Yeah.
If there's a reference for what the it is, I'm not seeing it.
Right, yeah, right. That's a good way to put it.
If he meant it as the possessive.
I mean, if he's talking about time as an abstract concept, we still need the contraction, wouldn't it? It is time.
Yeah. Yeah, whose time?
Yeah.
Whose time is he talking about?
So they're in the pub and they're talking, or rather the speaker is talking about someone who needs to look good for their husband who's back in the war, because that's what he's gonna care about. Is very surface level, like her looking pretty. How is that connected with drinking?
Everybody looks good after 1 a.m.
Oh, that's.
Bam.
Or by 2 or 3 around, you look like kind of a mess if you continue to be drinking.
What you were saying, Vino Veritas.
Vino Veritas. And after a while, everybody will tell you the absolute truth that they believe. It doesn't make any difference. It happened an hour ago. It was a different absolute truth. But very emphatic. I used to be a bartender. I had to listen to that all night.
I like the word good night too. That's word emphasis on the word goon. I don't know. It's a strange creation.
And it's striking though, they're talking about the guy's been off at the wars, and this woman's obviously had a number of abortions or whatever, has her teeth are like such a mess that the first thing her husband wants to do is get her to fix her teeth. I mean, she's a mess. He's coming home from the wars, he's a mess. And basically everybody's saying, well, just clean up on the surface and it'll be fine. Make it look all right. It's getting back to the old idea of, to make it look nice for the people, make it look nice for the neighbors. Doesn't mean anything about really touching on the deeper things underneath it. If you can clean up the top surface, you can get by.
I was really surprised after reading something about money in the Son of the Righteous that didn't come up once in the poem altogether. Or no, it did come up once, but not in this scene.
Well, he mentions though that her husband gave her money.
Yeah.
Oh,
To fix
okay.
it.
Yeah.
And she hasn't, it implies she used the money to get the chemicals for an abortion.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So that word pretty in Jake's rejoinder to Brett is kind of saying that, okay, if we slap
Yeah,
this.
it's ironic, actually.
Yeah. Ironic,
Yeah.
exactly, yeah. I know, we touched on this a little in book one, but that word funny comes up a lot in descriptions of the war wound of Jake's homosexual companions that she comes up with in the bar and the count. So there's a lot going on that is ironic. But how does that jive with the irony of like him always saying that he's, well, trying to think of a better way to word this.
They use the word funny for so many different things.
Yeah, and I don't know the words I never brought up. I had something for this.
Makes me think of people, who say just kidding all the time. They'll say something that they mean, but is like either painful or cutting or something like that, and then they say just kidding. And it's like they can touch the thing they don't talk about, but just for a moment, and then they have to
Yes,
step
they
back.
feel the need to soften it.
Yeah. It's a comedy. I'm just joshing. I'm just kidding. It's funny. I wonder whether, would you go to Pamplona with this crowd?
No.
No.
I think I'd go.
Really?
Yeah. It's
If
kind of
you
like
want-
watching a car wreck, but
I don't know, it sounds too violent for me.
But if you were trailing in their wake and weren't in the shooting gallery among them, so you were close enough to hear it, but not necessarily get drawn into it,
Yeah.
it'd probably be pretty entertaining.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And, Jake knows about bullfighting, so, I want to be in the seat behind him to listen to his commentary. So, in a perverse way, it probably would be fun.
How does Jake become like, I'm wondering about that idea of fizzing on, that somehow simultaneously Jake has a busy on that he's a spectator, but so does Romero as a bullfighter. So he's like legitimizing spectatorship as much of a sport as taking place with the bulls. Why is that? Why is it important anyway historically to be like, well, legitimizing a spectatorship? Because arguably, I mean, throughout the whole novel, what Jake is selling, if we want to think about it that way, is the correct way to do things. Like, this is the correct way to drink. This is the correct way to act. You pay for everything. And this is the correct way to view and take in a bullfight. When he's explaining to Brett how to, this is what you look for. When you say it through this way, this is the correct way to do it. Hemingway, throughout his career, was a creature of American media. So was he legitimizing spectatorship beyond the idea of physiology?
Maybe he's legitimizing it because he was a medic in World War I, and he wasn't in the fight, but he was observing. So maybe his spectatorship is kind of his way of legitimizing his role in the war.
That's a good point.
But explain, I'm not sure I follow.
Well, he's saying that Hemingway is legitimizing spectatorship. In a way, he was a spectator in World War I. He wasn't a combatant. So he may be part of his need to puff himself up by saying this is an important role too.
He was not an ambulance driver. He was, I don't know, if you watch a little bit of part one of the documentary, he embellished his war story as like part of the myth of Hemingway.
That's very American.
He was not in the war. He was injured, but he was injured because he was like handing out chocolate to the front lines because he wanted to be there, not because he had to be there. And he wasn't an ambulance driver. So in a way, I agree, and he was like legitimizing spectatorship because he was only a spectator.
Isn't that a heroic thing? Yeah, to pick up people on the battlefield?
No, he was not an ambulance driver.
No.
Said that later.
Oh,
That
okay.
he was, but he was not.
Okay.
So all that about his being hit by water and losing his kneecap and all that, that had to happen in the field.
Yes,
But
but
he was not trying to bring wounded back.
no. He said he was later on, but he did not.
What did he do during the Spanish Civil War?
I think he was an ambulance driver in that.
I thought he was a war correspondent
Yeah,
in
yeah.
the Spanish Civil War. So he was, again, covering it, but as a spectator, not as a participant on either side.
Well, do you think he looked down on himself for that reason, or?
I don't know enough about Hemingway himself to say that. And, whether he's legitimizing spectatorship, there's something to being a knowledgeable fan of the sport, and that's your connection to a sport. So I don't know if he's trying to justify being a spectator, but I think, as you said, Jake's throughout the book showing people, here's the way I do things, and whether explicitly or implicitly, that's the right way or the best way to do things.
He's also, the character Jake, he's kind of saying this bullfighter and I are on the same level. You know,
They're
they're,
both on the battlefield, so to speak.
well, they both have like equal passion and skill in understanding the sport. So he's putting himself on the same level with this guy that Brett has the hots for, you know? So he's saying, you know, I'm just like him, see? And, you know, so he's still kind of building himself up for her.
An interesting one about Hemingway, they don't really get into this in the documentary, but he was not, for his first jobs with the Kansas Star and Toronto Star, he was not writing articles, which is really part of the Hemingway lore, that he got his style from being a writer in the newspaper. What he really did was wrote ad copy, like sold things pretty much. So that's an interesting angle to approach reading this book, and a lot of it, like from the economic description of things to like getting their worth and things worth, and his selling the correct way to like consume things.
Well, it's a pretty good way to learn to write though, because every word has to count in ad copy.
Right, yeah.
You know, so you don't put in anything that you don't need. So that's, you learn that lesson.
But this is a Hemingway-esque book, isn't it? And he was a
No.
correspondent after, and by the time he gets to Farewell Arms and the Coles, he is writing that clip.
Yeah.
Don't bury the lead. Way of writing, so. I didn't know this. Are you sure that he never wrote any, I guess he was only 18 when.
Oh yeah, before this book, he was not. He became a correspondent afterwards.
So he was a little too young for World War One, and he was what, 38, 39 in the Spanish Civil War.
Right.
So he was on the other side.
I was gonna ask how you escaped the draft, but it's obvious.
I don't know how extensive the draft was in World War One.
It was real sense.
But only for 1 year.
It too. Actually, it didn't end with World War. Well, it did after a year, but it was not well taken by the American public. I mean, it's just 60 years after drafts for the Civil War, which were not popular.
And if he was only 17, 18, I don't know if they would have thought him too young for the draft in World War I.
Yeah.
I think he wanted to go, but his parents wouldn't like sign the papers, let him go. He was born in 1899. So he would have been able to go if his parents would have signed some
Permission.
Yeah.
So when did he go? 17? 1917?
No, he was a volunteer in the Italian army, right?
Yeah.
He was never drafted in the American.
Yes, but when did he go over to Italy then? Was that in 1917 or 18?
Yeah, I think
18 and 19.
very end of the war, yeah.
Yeah, which was, America came in at 17, so.
Yeah.
So, and Hemingway went before we entered World War I, right? He went because we didn't have forces he could join, he went so he could
I don't
be
know.
there with none of these.
I'm sure the British or French would have happily taken him if he really wanted to go fight.
Sounds like he wanted to go look.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think that's what I'm getting at with like legitimizing spectatorship. Hemingway's power of observing is how I think part of what makes his style so important, so quintessential in a way to say like it's not so much about plot as it is about observation. And again, like the idea that what is most redemptive about this book is the style, not the characters, not the plot. It's the way that it's written.
Right, so the value is not the story, but the way it's told.
True.
Okay.
Well, Twain would have approved of that.
I don't think that it's a vindication or celebration of spectatorship. I think the spectators were removed from the real struggle. And that's what all these people are, they're just onlookers in the worst view that I can.
Right.
Just looking at things, don't have any don't have any goals besides trying to track the other sex or grabbing for the next drink. God, how many different kinds of whiskey do they drink in a given night? Champagne, wine, Pernod, absinthe.
That's the thing that
The
counts.
bottom of that for Malone.
Keep going.
Yeah.
I would be so, I would,
Yeah,
It's not, I think you were just saying.
that's how it'd be on the floor. I mean, they're consuming so much alcohol, their livers have to be.
Your point though is interesting because they don't consider themselves spectators, do they? When all the English show up in their big cars, they put them down because they're spectators, they're not part of it.
Yeah.
And they really consider themselves, because they're having drinks in the.
Well, they're here in their shiny cars. We're here with a real deal.
That's right, we're in the cafe.
Well,
Question.
I'm looking at this as a person who writes. And as a person who writes, you're always looking for things to write about. And so you write about the people that you observe in your life. So I feel as if what he's doing is he's capturing perhaps real people or composites of real people who are in his life, and that he is the ultimate spectator, and he is a spectator of their drinking and their gambling and their sexual activity, and then they go to the ultimate spectator sport of bullfighting, where you watch people and animals die. So I think he is a spectator.
I think he's a spectator, but he's also a moralizer.
Yes, yes.
It's also, I can't think of a better word, kind of a chronicler.
Yeah.
Yes, looking for something to write about. All of us who write are always looking for something to write about.
Do you believe, Jake? I think I asked this in the first discussion, but is Jake believable? And why or why not?
Well, he's critical of himself at times. See, if he's a moralizer, he doesn't say to another character, go thou and do likewise, be like me. Although I think I agree that there's a big moral undercurrent here, where the lack of morality is the fecklessness and all that introduced by the existential movement, where there is nothing to cling to outside of,
What's within you.
yeah.
And I don't think there's anything in the story that gives us reason to believe that Jake is not accurately reported.
Okay. I think it was Rob Ellison, the author of this man. He said when Hemingway wrote something, believe him. He's been there. Is that a notion, or is that part of his writer's ideal, or I guess I'm thinking of as I lay dying. Which voice do you believe the most? It would be Doral, right? The rest of the characters, they have something that sways them. Like the father wants teeth, right? And as they lay dying.
Yeah,
So everybody is like swayed by something, except for Darla. And I'm thinking where Jake fits in that.
Are you saying he's unreliable?
I don't know. That's the question.
I think he's as reliable
Yeah.
as any human being.
Yeah.
He has his point of view. All the other characters are fairly reliable too. They're
Okay.
not, they may not be truthful, but they're telling what they think, right? What they see.
Right.
And I think Jake is absolutely saying what he's seeing from his position looking at the world.
But why do we believe him?
He gives us no reason not
Yeah.
to.
He gives us no reason not to. Okay.
Well, I didn't necessarily believe him in book one. But in book two, as the story unfolded, it confirmed some of what he said in book one. And it fleshed out everybody. It fleshed out the relationships among the,
That's really interesting to me from the bed play earlier. That book two kind of does away with these like surface level visceral interactions and really gets to the meat of the characters. They really reveal themselves in book two.
But like we said earlier, during a festival, the conventions come off and you kind of see a little beneath that.
Right.
So I always think of this book as a diary.
Reads like a diary.
Read like a diary.
Yeah.
So we always make ourselves look a little better in our diary. Someone writing about the same time, Anna Snin, or
Yeah.
I won't do anything. I mean, no one could be that good. But she's saying what she thought happened. And I think he's as reliable as that, is what he wants to believe. But I think you can't say any more about any character. It's what they want you to hear, right?
I think Jake emerges as believable because so much of what Hemingway does is to use dialogue to dramatize what's going on in people's minds. What Robert Cohn says to Jake when he's talking about Lady Bread and he wants to go to South America. And Jake says, no, you can't get away from yourself. And it just goes on and on. It shows, it dramatizes for me the lack of depth that Cohn has in his thinking and in his pursuits and desires. He's a very, very insecure guy. And I think, anyway, my point was that the dialogue in dramatizing what the characters are like gets around the idea that Jake may not be reliable. I think he is reliable, and that the dialogue, he makes pronouncements about Cohn and about Lady Bread and about the Matador and about other people, but a lot of it's borne out, I think, with what people say. And that's what they do. His dialogue in these short stories and stuff is really, really effective.
Yeah.
At bringing out conflict that people are trying to keep hidden, like hills like white elephants.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's my kind of response to whether he's a credible narrator.
Oh. Well, we wrap.
Yeah.
Thank you so much
Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
Maybe it was just pretty to think so. I really, really enjoyed this, guys. I learned a lot from you all, so thank you.
Yeah, everybody made good contributions to the discussion, I think.
Yeah.
I find myself somewhat less stupid than when I started.
Bye, all.
Bye-bye.